Hello and welcome. I'm Lee Hopwood, CEO here at the CCMA, and I'm delighted to be joined by Spencer Brooks today. Now, he is co-founder, CEO, Chief Growth Officer, and no doubt bottle washer at TKG, the Knowledge Group. Hi, Spencer. How are you doing this morning?
Great, thank you very much. Apart from the weather, but it's good.
It's all good. I know. Where did that summer go? Has it been and gone? And did you know it's in a month's time? And I think it is a month's time, almost to the day, we're going to start seeing the nights drawing in. Anyway, I want to move away from that because that's just scary. That says we're going to be saying Happy Christmas before we know it. Right, last week, Spencer, we hosted a rather unique contact center outsourcing summit. And it was designed to really help contact center professionals that outsource all or part of their operation to learn from each other. And I kind of figured that by learning how they can build stronger and more effective relationships with their BPO partners, this should also have a positive impact on our friends across the outsourcing world. And so that's one of the reasons why we brought this group together. And I mean, it was a fascinating day, absolutely fascinating. And given that our mission here at the CCMA is to support the whole industry, I thought I'd ask you, Spencer, to join me here live on LinkedIn to share some of your observations from the day and also to bring to life some of the insights from the UK Contact Centre Outsourcing Report that we've also published last week, which is only available to members of the CCMA. So last week, as well as ASOS and Newcastle Building Society sharing their stories, and we had a great and very honest panel discussion, we also had a couple of roundtables that you, Spencer, hosted for us. One of them was on procurement, one of them was on the management of partners. And so without sharing any secrets or confidentiality from the day, Spencer, what are contact centre leaders looking for, first and foremost, when they are looking to outsource any or part of their contact centre?
Yeah, and thanks for letting me join in this today, and also for the great event that we kind of partnered with last week. Before I answer that, the people that were there were predominantly, like you said, leaders rather than maybe procurement people. So, there was a natural bias on what they were thinking rather than it being the traditional, it's all about price, which was quite nice and refreshing. And, the themes that came out of the initial roundtable where we talked about, searching and finding a partner, absolutely top of the list was cultural alignment or affinity. And the debate was so much about people buy into people. And part of that was about how sometimes that's where some of the failings are as well, because it's such a challenge for suppliers to maintain either management level or even just frontline delivery level because of the levels of attrition that are in some of those organizations. So that cultural alignment, that means that it doesn't matter whether it be the first person who works with the buyer or the second or the third, that they all have the same affiliation to culture and values that were always kind of seen at the very beginning of the sales process. So absolutely, culture was number one. The next thing that kind of came on the list was around people getting under the skin of capability, rather than it being a PowerPoint assumption and a reference to something. It was actually really understanding that can the capability be evidenced, and that might be about in a sector. It might be about the actual service that's being delivered because it's particularly complicated or has a certain nuance to it. So that kind of evidence-based assessment was really, really important to these buyers. And, cost was in there as well, but it was definitely in the kind of second tier of focus of discussion around those tables.
So is cost still a major factor? I mean, we do hear it when I have conversations with both outsourcers that are saying, "Oh yeah, we're getting driven down on cost," and also with the buyers, the contact center leaders. There is, even though when they're looking for value and looking at a different relationship, cost still comes into the conversation. Is it still a major factor?
Yeah, I think it is, with inflation and economic challenges and everything, and, particular trading issues with certain sectors, price is going to be an issue. But that's normally the bias, which is who's buying it, will kind of drive it. I mean, in public sector at the moment, and they always have been, they've been very, very transparent about evaluation, and the optics are normally, value for the taxpayer stroke price is in the kind of like 30 to 40% of the total evaluation. It's a little bit more opaque when you kind of get into the private sector. Procurement teams aren't always as open around what scoring methodology is and what percentages is applied and those kind of things. But you would still see that price is in that same kind of spectrum, probably slightly more biased higher in a private sector. But in the room, it was definitely, like I said, second tier discussion. It wasn't first primary tier. Like I said, culture, capability, scalability and flexibility, they can kind of come hand in hand. I think that's ultimately around making sure that the partner can evolve with the buyer, and that it's not going to just be binary, and that they're going to outgrow each other. So that's kind of like I think those things can kind of still fit into that kind of culture, capability kind of, theme. But it is vitally important that a supplier isn't outgrown very quickly.
Yeah, and you know what? Just leaning into what you say there about culture, the partnerships that I've seen, whether it's because I've been observing on awards programs, for example, the culture piece just rings through when you see a great partnership. I'm not surprised actually that was at the top of the list, but it's an interesting one. Good to hear, and it was also interesting to hear that so we did have a brief conversation around contracting
Yes.
Last week, which again that was interesting to hear, and around the room leaders seem to be really inspired to really think about what might be in the contract. And for me, it feels like that is a step in the right direction for moving away from it being about price and really focusing on that true value that we know that the outsourcers can bring. So, so here's a question for you, Spencer. What value can those outsourcers actually build into their contracts to protect their price, I guess, in some respects?
Yeah, I think, in that kind of post-award, as we would call it, once you're into the kind of nitty-gritty of delivery, most contracts have the kind of structure, but it's the effort that you need to put in place to make sure that things are being managed effectively. Yeah, because outsourcing isn't like running an in-house operation. It is different. It's more around holding the supplier to account, but in a way that isn't, being overly prescriptive, because you've set up the commercial arrangement and the governance, particularly to make sure that you maximize the value, and you have an expectation that supplier will bring some of that value. So by trying to dictate, then you take away from the value, and that definitely came through in some of the discussions that we talked about. In that post award, outside of contract, the next biggest thing was around managing change and delivering change effectively. And I think the buyers have an expectation that the supplier needs to receive change, where sometimes it's a fait accompli, in a regulatory environment where, the obligations are sat with the buyer to make sure that the service is controlled within the FCA compliance regulation. But then there's others, which is actually, then it's how does the service change and how are they delivering innovation? Because change, innovation sits inside change. So that was a big discussion point. And they found a lot of the buyers talked about that being quite a fractious engagement in terms of how that works contractually. So taking steps at the very, very beginning to align governance, align structures, and kind of not talking about what 4.2.7 of the contract says, but what the expectation was on both sides around both obligations and kind of what they expect from each other. And sometimes that missed. I think the transition from sourcing into implementation into BAU, some of that that early engagement kind of gets lost in the noise or in the timeline at the back end. And as we said before, people change as well. Who does the front end sourcing, who does the implementation, who does the back end delivery, can all be different people. So trying to manage that constant alignment of values through into the running of the BAU is where it can kind of fall over. And that's where we find most of our engagements is going in and helping people assess where the partnership is failing. And the first point is normally say it's the contract. Well, actually, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the structure and everything is there, and actually it's just a kind of reset and restatement of the boundaries between both organizations.
Interesting. And that whole topic of contracts is one that I think Kate and the team here at the CCMA are going to bring into the special interest group that's dedicated to helping organizations that use outsourcers. And that, just to say, is a member only benefit there. But it'll be interesting to see how that develops and grows over the coming months and years. Now, from your experience then, Spencer, where is that friction point? You talked about it, maybe the contract was right and the structure was right, and then things migrate and move. But where do you see the biggest friction between a client and their BPO partner?
Transparency. It really is, just sits in that really simple situation where, if suppliers are honest, but also the reaction of that honesty by the buyer to, work together to solve whatever the problem is. It might be service level, it might be something within the billing that's wrong, it might be something within delivery, whatever it is. I think transparency around challenges on both sides is really, really important. Otherwise, you just have this wall between each other where you're both making lots of assumptions about what's happening on the other side. And actually, the only people that really kind of fall short in the long term is the end customer that you're trying to serve. So honesty and transparency, and that goes again, going back to culture and values, is really, really important. We're helping a client at the moment exactly around that, around that kind of point where the buyer's got to the point where anything that's kind of communicated or brought through is just not believed. And that's not an overnight thing. That's been building up for months and months and months. And what we're doing is helping them almost restate that, right, let's clear the decks, let's not look at the past, and let's kind of just look at the future and just restate where we are. Again, that's an example of like the buyers had multiple changes, half the team are new, and the suppliers had exactly the same. So people have just done well, that's what we've always done before, but that's not necessarily what the buyer wants going forward. So that's where most of the friction we kind of see. And again, in that change environment, the expectation of change. So am I just always telling them what to do because they're not telling me what we should do? Yeah. And again, that kind of still fits in with that honesty, which is be recipient to a supplier saying maybe you need to do something different, and vice versa. Don't be so kind of over controlling. So those are where most of the kind of frictions kind of come.
And you mentioned there a little bit earlier, you mentioned the change, and the whole industry is going through change at the moment. And whether that is outsourcers are having to deal with new technology that's coming in and really enabling them to enhance their offering, through to the in-house folk who are struggling to recruit and are looking to technology. So technology is one of those improvement areas. It is an area where innovation is being able to be really born. Is that, from what you're seeing, how are contact centers working with their outsourced partners around that? Are they going to their outsourcers saying, right, we need to do more from a technology perspective, we need to do more in digital channels, we need to do more in automation? Or is it happening the other way around, where the outsourcers are saying, right, we know we deliver this service, we think that we should be adding this channel or this automation or this piece of AI? Where is that being driven from?
So it's in bigger organizations where the customer touch points are beyond just the call center. whether that be in store, it might be in other engagement channels. You know, the ownership of the end-to-end is definitely sat within the buyer. And because of that, a lot of it is the technology is sat within the buyer. And that's definitely a shift compared to, say, even 10 years ago. Because also buying of technology is, even though it's a complicated landscape, actually it's easier to buy. Yeah, there was a bit of a narrow market previously where you had to the easiest route to buy it through your provider. But now, you know, with the likes of Amazon Connect, with the likes of Google entering the market, you know, the ability to get those technologies in your own environment and then push that over into the supplier to execute, you know, is definitely moving more and more. But suppliers are still equally able to work with their ecosystem. I mean, Peter talked about those things when we were there last week. You know, he did his speech at the beginning around ecosystems within suppliers is really important. And I think what Peter's saying there is beyond what they do, who else do they partner with that can bring added value or innovation into the partnership? And I think that is important. And smaller organizations who are buying, who either don't have that front leading technology in their roadmap or don't have the capex or opex to deal with it, will work with suppliers to kind of deliver changes and step change. But I do think that change, like I said, it's two sides in terms of whether it be technology or not. Change is definitely around doing the basics right. And, you know, suppliers have to earn a right to have a conversation around innovation and continuous improvement. Without doing the basics, without getting consistency and quality, and without showing insight, the conversation around technology and innovation is off the table. You know, that they've got to build those kind of narratives through.
Yeah, and you know what, that whole data and insight piece is an interesting one. From all the conversations that I have, the outsourcers have got access to so much data about their clients and the insights that they're getting from their interactions with their clients' customers. But then they're also building up a much broader picture of what's going on, so they're able to add that value as a partner to a buyer. So that whole data and insights piece, we're seeing it within the contact center itself. And you know, one of the things that we're launching today is the conference, and the strategic value that the contact center has is massive, and it's driven by the insights that it gets hold of all the time.
Absolutely. And you know, and buyers need to listen. And that definitely kind of comes out, like you said, these walls come up, whether it be because of all the themes that we talked about before. But you know, buyers really need to listen, because like you said, you know, they have the tools and they actually have the connection and network to enter into different conversations around how people are doing things differently within their existing client base. So that's absolutely vitally important. And like you said, that's insight in that there's data, but there's insight in terms of intellectual property that other people are kind of willing to share, which is a bit, I suppose, what we were trying to do last week. You know, that opportunity for a peer-to-peer conversation. And that peer-to-peer conversation is a positive. It's not, you know, that environment isn't around supplier bashing and it's all terrible and that kind of stuff. It was a sharing of, actually, I see this working when I do this, and someone saying, brilliant, that's amazing. I'll take that away and I'll use that piece of insight to deal with my supplier in a different way, or take that to them as a way of working. You know, that kind of knowledge share and insight was really, really important to people. And there was a couple of people who kind of said at the end, when you did your close, and saying, you know, I came last year and I went this year, and I've learned even more from one year to the next. So the conversations that we're doing is shifting the dial. Hopefully we're not just standing and doing exactly what we said last year. Every year with yourselves and with the report, we're trying to move the dial forward to make partnerships better. Because I think, as you said at the opening to this is why we work with you guys, because, you know, we're completely aligned in that it's not just about one side of the fence. It's about everybody getting a better outcome from outsourcing together.
Yeah, and clearly I couldn't agree with you more. As I said, our mission is to help the whole industry, and I genuinely think that this is a really positive and healthy conversation that's being had. And yeah, we don't do negative in our conversations anyway. We're always looking for the next best thing and how we can improve, how we can make things better. So talking of which, so I've got one more question for you, Spencer. Leaning into your experiences, leaning into what you heard last week as well, what does make a great partnership between a client and their BPO partner?
You can't get over the fact that if you do what you had always set out to do, expectation wise, and you do that consistently, that is always 80 to 90% of the success. Yeah. I think there's a bit of suppliers liking to suggest differentiation, so we're doing AI, we're doing chatbot with this and we're taking volume out of here, and that is important, with all the stuff that's going on with the likes of Klarna and those sort of things, disrupting the kind of BPO space in terms of markets and stuff. But really, it's just about doing the best as you can. That's where it works. Yeah. And like you said, you see that in the awards, Dave, the co-founder of TKG, he does awards stuff. So do I. And that does come out, it does come out. Normally the ones with the best tech and roadmap and transformation don't always win, because that's quite a difficult journey. Those things are difficult to work out and deliver. So if the basics are done well and the customers get the experience that's expected of the buyer, they are the ones that are the most successful. It's consistency of what they do.
I love it when we see in the awards where a client is pushing to enter and lead on a nomination rather than the partner. Yeah. I love seeing that, and it's interesting to see, and it does absolutely happen. Spencer, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a fascinating conversation, as it was a fascinating day last week. And hopefully this has been really useful to our colleagues across the contact centre, both on the client side and on the outsourcing side. And I think it is worth pointing out both the report that is now available to CCMA members, and also the special interest group that is dedicated to helping those that outsource, all or part of their operation. So that again is a CCMA member benefit. And we are currently exploring new ways to support the outsourcers themselves too. We've got some things coming up, which will all be revealed, no doubt, through LinkedIn in the coming months. But of course, if you are an outsourcer and you have some ideas of how we can continue to support you, then please do let us know. Really, completely open door, open to ideas. I'm always looking for new, fresh ways of being able to support our industry. But for now, Spencer, thank you so much, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Lee.